She gave him a cookie to make him smile. She had no idea he was a millionaire and about to change her life forever. Jacob Lawson hadn't intended to go out that morning. For the past few months, he'd kept mostly to himself, avoiding the polished routines of his old life, the meetings, the press, the polite smiles of strangers who knew a name only because of his bank account. Ever since he lost his closest friend in a sudden accident, the world had dimmed, and so had he. He stopped shaving. His once sharply styled dark hair now curled messily over his ears, and his normally pressed suits hung looser on his frame, forgotten in the back of his closet. But something compelled him that day to leave the silence of his penthouse and walk without direction. He wandered through a part of town he didn't usually visit, his thoughts distant and his coat too thin for the wind that brushed against his skin. It was a small cafe in a quiet corner that caught his eye, not because it was fancy, but because it wasn't. It looked like it had stories. The wooden sign above the door was chipped at the edges, and a little bell jingled weakly when he stepped inside. It smelled like cinnamon and old coffee grounds, and there was a warmth in the air that didn't come from expensive radiators or designer lighting, but from something older, gentler. Jacob made his way to a booth in the far corner and sat down, lowering his head into his hands. He hadn't cried in public before, not even after the funeral, but something inside him had fractured this morning. He hadn't expected anyone to notice or care. And then she appeared. A small figure approached the table so quietly he didn't notice her until she was right in front of him. She couldn't have been older than 6. Long blonde hair fell over her shoulders and bright blue eyes peeked up at him curiously from beneath delicate lashes. She wore a white t-shirt tucked into a denim skirt and a bright red apron that nearly swallowed her tiny frame. In her hands, she held a wide glass jar filled with cookies. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, watching him with a kind of calm that felt far too old for someone her age. Then she said softly and seriously, "Don't cry. This is a cookie for a smile." He looked up, stunned, and for a moment couldn't find his voice. Her presence, so sincere and unbothered by his grief, was disarming. He took the cookie from her small hand without thinking and managed to whisper, "You're very kind." She nodded, as if that settled it, and turned to walk away. But before she did, she looked over her shoulder and added, "You look like you needed one." Jacob sat there for a while, holding the cookie but not eating it, just staring at it like it was something sacred. It wasn't the cookie that mattered. It was the way she had said it, the quiet certainty in her voice, like she truly believed a little sweetness could fix something broken inside him. He blinked, trying to understand the sudden ache that had taken over his chest, deeper than grief. He looked around the cafe then properly and saw the handwritten menus, the mismatched chairs, the flowers in chipped vases. It was imperfect and small, but it felt alive. He didn't know her name or why she was working in a cafe instead of being in school, but he knew one thing: that small act of kindness had done more for him in 2 minutes than months of silence and solitude had ever managed. It hadn't fixed anything, but it reminded him he wasn't invisible. And in that moment, it was enough. The next morning, Jacob turned to the cafe. He didn't plan it, just like he hadn't planned to go there the day before, but something about the place had lingered with him overnight: the smell of cinnamon, the clink of mismatched mugs, the quiet warmth that had settled over him like a forgotten blanket. Mostly, though, it was the girl. The one with the cookie jar and the eyes too big and blue for someone who had already learned how to spot sadness in a stranger. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. So he walked back through the same streets, ignored the curious glances at his wrinkled shirt and unshaven face, and pushed the cafe door open just as the first wave of morning customers were finishing their coffees. He chose the same seat as before, by the window where the soft light pooled onto the table. This time he looked around more closely. A woman with tired eyes and a strong posture stood behind the counter, writing something down in a notebook. Her dark blonde hair was tied in a messy bun, and though her face held lines of exhaustion, there was something undeniably steady about her presence, like a lighthouse. Occasionally, she glanced over at a small figure who was wiping down a nearby table. The girl. She was wearing the same red apron, now smudged with flour or dust, and was humming to herself as she cleaned. Jacob waited, unsure if anyone would come over to take his order, and wondering whether he should be embarrassed to be there again so soon. It was the woman who approached first. She carried a notepad and gave him a polite but guarded smile. "Can I get you something?" she asked, her voice calm but distant. "Just coffee." "Black," Jacob replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "You're the little girl. She gave me a cookie yesterday." The woman raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like Emily. She does that sometimes." Jacob smiled faintly. It helped. Something in the woman's face shifted slightly, softening. "I'm Lucy," she said. "Emily's my niece." Jacob nodded. "She's special?" Lucy didn't answer right away. She looked over at the girl again, now carefully lining up salt shakers on each table with precision. "She's been through more than most adults," Lucy finally said. "Lost both her parents in a car accident 2 years ago. My sister was driving. They didn't make it. Emily did." Jacob's breath caught in his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, unsure if the words were enough. "Thanks," Lucy said. "We're getting by. Or trying to. I own this place and Emily helps when she can. She wants to help more than she should." "She seems too young to be working," Jacob said carefully. "She is," Lucy replied, "but I let her help in little ways, wipe tables, hand out cookies. It makes her feel strong. And to be honest, we don't have a lot of options. I was diagnosed with cancer last year. Stage 2. I'm doing treatment, working the cafe, taking care of her. It's a lot." Jacob looked at Lucy, this woman holding a cafe and a child in her own failing health together with one tired hand. It humbled him in a way that no business deal or award ever had. He felt suddenly useless in his expensive coat and forgotten wealth. "Is she happy?" he asked quietly. Lucy followed his gaze back to Emily. The girl had crouched down beside an older woman's table, tying the woman's dropped napkin back to her lap. "She has her days, but she's strong. I try to protect her from everything, but she's already seen too much." The coffee arrived, placed gently in front of him. It was too hot to drink, so Jacob just wrapped his hands around the cup, trying to warm himself with more than just the temperature. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would offer more than a moment of sympathy, but all he could do was ask, "What do you need?" Lucy tilted her head, surprised. "Why?" "Because you didn't deserve this," Jacob said. "Neither of you did." She gave a sad smile. "Deserve doesn't really factor in. Life hands you what it hands you. We're not asking for charity. We're okay." Jacob nodded slowly. "But maybe not forever. And I've got more than I need, maybe more than anyone should." Lucy looked at him carefully, trying to read the man behind the unshaved beard and tired eyes. "Are you trying to save us?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "I think you've already saved me. I just didn't expect a little girl with a cookie to remind me how to feel again." Lucy blinked quickly, caught off guard. Then, for the first time, she let down a little of her guard. "We need some new kitchen equipment. I've been putting off repairs because I'm saving for my next round of treatment, but we're managing." Jacob didn't press her for more. He just nodded, took a sip of his now warm coffee, and said, "Then I'll be back tomorrow." Lucy didn't argue. She just said, "Emily will be happy." And as he stood to leave, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, purpose not born of business, but of something human and raw. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months, he knew where he wanted to be. The next day, Jacob returned early, even before the cafe opened to customers. The city was still shaking off its morning haze and the streets were quieter than usual. He waited outside, hands in his coat pockets, breathing in the cool air as he tried to work up the courage to do something he wasn't used to, help without a contract, without a title, without anyone knowing. When Lucy finally arrived, unlocking the front door with one hand while balancing a crate of supplies in the other, he stepped forward without hesitation and offered to carry it. She looked surprised but didn't resist, simply nodded her thanks and let him inside. The cafe was quieter without the chatter of customers, and he noticed details he hadn't before: the way the corners of the walls were worn, the flicker in the old refrigerator lights, the patched tile beneath the counter. It wasn't falling apart, but it was close. Lucy placed the crate behind the counter, then turned to him. "You said you'd come back?" she said. "I didn't think you meant it literally." "I always mean it," he said simply, "especially when I don't say it often." He reached into his coat and pulled out a manila folder, setting it gently on the counter between them. "I had some of my people look into suppliers. You could upgrade the kitchen with half of what you're spending now. I also found a few grant programs that help local small businesses owned by women and caregivers. If we register the cafe, I can help you apply." Lucy stared at the folder, then back at him. "Why are you doing this?" Jacob hesitated for a second. "Because I need to do something that matters, because you matter. And that little girl out there with a cookie jar, she reminded me that kindness is still possible, that it can come from anyone. So maybe it's my turn to pay it forward." Lucy let out a soft breath. "I don't like asking for help." "You didn't," he replied. "I'm offering." She picked up the folder, opened it, and skimmed the pages. Her eyes flicked across numbers and notes and highlighted lines of opportunity she hadn't known existed. "This is a lot. I can walk you through it," Jacob said, "or I can just handle it and let you decide how far you want to go with it. There's no catch, Lucy. I'm not buying your business. I'm just investing in your future." She looked at him with a cautious kind of gratitude, as if afraid that accepting meant losing control. But then Emily appeared from the back room, rubbing sleep from her eyes, already dressed in her apron. She spotted Jacob and lit up instantly. "You came back." "I told you I would," he said, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, slightly crumbled cookie wrapped in napkin. "This one's for you," she said proudly. "I made it." Jacob took it as if it were priceless. "Then I'll keep it forever." Lucy watched the exchange, something soft breaking behind her eyes. She could see it now, not pity or charity, but something honest. Jacob wasn't there to save them. He was trying to build something quietly, with his hands in his heart, the way only someone who had lost and finally wanted to give again could. Later that day, Jacob sat with her in the back office, going over paperwork and cost breakdowns. He never spoke about his wealth. He didn't need to, Mom. His presence, his time, and his patience said more than any wire transfer could. Lucy asked questions, challenged him on parts of the plan, and he welcomed it. They worked until dusk, and when he finally stood to leave, Lucy walked him to the door and said, "I still don't know what brought you here." He paused, looking around the cafe that had become more familiar in just a few visits than most places he'd known for years. "I was lost," he said, "and she found me." Lucy didn't ask who he meant. She knew, as the door closed behind him and the little bell rang its quiet note, she turned back to see Emily placing cookies on each table with quiet precision, singing under her breath. For the first time in a long while, Lucy allowed herself to believe things might get better, not just in survival, but in joy. And Jacob, walking home with a child's cookie in his hand and hope in his chest, understood that healing didn't always come in grand moments. Sometimes it started in small places, like a booth by the window, like a cookie offered by a child. Over the next several weeks, Jacob became a familiar presence at the cafe. He came every morning before work, sometimes staying through the late morning rush if he wasn't needed at the office, and always returned on weekends without fail. He never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes it was a box of fresh fruit from a supplier he now had on speed dial, sometimes a new apron for Emily in her favorite color, and other times just coffee and breakfast he'd picked up for Lucy because he knew she hadn't eaten in. But more than anything, what he brought was time. He fixed things that had been broken for years, a drawer that never shut properly, a leaky faucet in the back room, a wobbly table near the front window. He reorganized storage shelves, helped Lucy with spreadsheets, and sat with Emily while she did her reading assignments at a corner booth between customers. The staff had started calling him the coffee ghost, joking that he haunted the place in a suit and always paid double. But they welcomed him. His presence made things easier, steadier. Emily had stopped asking why he kept showing up. She simply accepted it with the unshakable trust children give to those who have never once let them down. She began saving him a special cookie each morning, sometimes shaped like a star or a heart or even a crooked cat, and she'd beam when he pretended to guess what it was before taking a bite. Lucy noticed changes in herself too. The stress she'd carried like armor over her shoulders had begun to ease, not just because the bills were getting handled, but because someone had stepped into the storm with her. Someone who didn't flinch at the hard parts or vanish when the mood grew quiet. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to rest a little more, to let others carry what she no longer had the strength to. Jacob didn't talk much about his own life, but when he did, his words were raw and unpolished. He spoke of the friend he'd lost, how grief had paralyzed him, how the world had continued on like it hadn't noticed someone extraordinary had vanished. Lucy understood. She didn't press him for details. She just listened. Sometimes that was enough. One evening, long after the cafe had closed, Lucy sat with Jacob in the kitchen while Emily slept curled on a bench with a blanket tucked around her. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Lucy sipped tea and Jacob sat quietly, holding one of Emily's star cookies in his hand. "I used to think I had to do everything alone," Lucy said suddenly. "That asking for help meant I'd failed somehow. My sister was like that too. We both learned early that being strong meant being quiet about it." Jacob looked up. "And now?" "Now I think strength is knowing when you're not okay and letting someone stay with you anyway." He nodded, his voice soft. "I wish I'd known that sooner." "You're learning," she said. "That's what matters." He glanced toward Emily. "I think she saved me, Lucy. I don't even know how to explain it. That day she gave me that cookie, I hadn't felt human in weeks. It was like she looked straight through me and still believed something good was in there." "She has a gift for that," Lucy replied with a faint smile. "She sees people not as they show themselves, but as they are underneath. Most adults forget how to do that." Jacob leaned back, exhaling slowly. "She's special. And you've raised her in all the right ways." "I'm trying," Lucy said. "I just want her to know love isn't something you have to earn. You've shown her that every day." Silence settled again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, shared, peaceful. In the quiet, they could feel the shape of something forming, not romance, not obligation, but something stronger, trust, rooted in honesty and small acts of showing up. When Jacob left that night, he paused at the doorway. "I'll see you tomorrow." Lucy looked up from the teacup and nodded. "Of course." And with that, he stepped into the night air, the cold not biting the way it once had. He didn't realize until he reached home that he was still holding the star-shaped cookie, untouched. He placed it carefully on a napkin, next to the others he hadn't eaten. He didn't need to. For now, just holding them was enough. They were more than cookies. They were reminders of who he was becoming. The days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt almost like healing. Jacob found comfort in routine, waking early, stopping by the cafe, offering help where it was needed without being asked. He had learned to make himself useful without drawing attention to it. And the staff, once guarded, had fully welcomed him into the fold. The regular customers noticed too. Some began asking if he was part owner. Others just assumed he was family. Jacob never corrected them. In his heart, the label didn't matter. The feeling did. But as the calendar flipped into a new month, something shifted. Lucy began missing mornings. At first, it was only once or twice Jacob arrived to find the assistant manager already setting up while Emily wiped counters with more focus than usual. When he asked where Lucy was, Emily smiled and said, "Sleeping in." But Jacob noticed the faint hesitation in her voice and the way her eyes didn't quite meet his. He didn't push. Not yet. The third time it happened, Lucy finally appeared just before noon, her steps slower, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion she couldn't disguise. She brushed off his concern, blaming it on a late night, on stress, on nothing specific. But Jacob knew better. He'd seen this kind of weariness before, not the kind that sleep could fix, but the kind that came from within, deep and cellular. He waited until they were alone later that day to bring it up. Emily had gone to play in the back room and the cafe had emptied out. "I don't mean to push," Jacob began gently, "but I've seen this before. With my friend, the fatigue, the missed mornings, the way you hold your side when you think no one's looking." Lucy didn't respond at first. She stood at the sink, scrubbing an already clean cup, her back to him. Then she stopped moving. Her shoulders tensed slightly and her voice came quieter than usual. "I had my checkup last week," she said. "It's back." The scans showed small metastases in the lungs. Jacob swallowed hard. "Are you starting treatment again?" "I have to," she said, "but it's more aggressive this time. Different meds, more side effects, and I can't afford to shut the cafe down." "You don't have to," he said instantly, stepping closer. "Let me." "Jacob," she interrupted, turning to face him, her expression calm but firm. "I knew this might happen. I've planned for this. We have savings, and insurance covers most of it." He searched her face. "But not all." "No," she admitted, "not all." He could hear the pride in her voice, the fierce independence she clung to even now. He admired it, but it tore at him too. "Then let me help," he said. "Not just with the money, with everything. The cafe. Emily, you don't have to carry this alone." She hesitated, looking down. "I'm not good at leaning on people." "I'm not good at being needed," he replied, "but I'm learning." That night, Jacob sat up in his apartment, unable to sleep. The idea of Lucy going through aggressive treatment again while still managing a business and raising a child that made his chest tighten. So he came up with a plan. By morning, he had created a simple fundraising campaign. No big announcements, no press coverage, just a sign at the cafe, "Cookies for a cause." Every cookie sold supports Lucy's treatment. Emily loved it. She immediately began decorating jars with hearts and stars, proudly telling every customer why their cookie mattered. The response was overwhelming. People donated more than the cookie price. Some left $100 bills in the tip jar. Others offered services, cleaning, painting, even accounting. The little cafe had become something bigger than itself, a place of community, of shared hope. And Lucy, though still tired, smiled more. Not because her problems were gone, but because she finally knew she didn't have to fight them alone. At the end of the week, Emily presented Jacob with a cookie she had made just for him. It was shaped like a smiley face with uneven frosting and 2 raisins for eyes. "For you," she said, beaming, "because you helped my mama. You're kind." Jacob knelt in front of her, overwhelmed. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You remind me what kindness looks like." She hugged him without warning. He closed his eyes, holding on to the moment. In that quiet embrace, with the hum of the cafe in the background and hope stirring inside them both, Jacob realized something that had been slowly forming since the day she first handed him that cookie. He wasn't just helping them heal, they were helping him live again. As spring edged closer and the days began to stretch with soft light, The cafe's atmosphere transformed in ways that were impossible to ignore. There was still the clinking of mugs and the scent of warm pastries in the air, but now it came with something more powerful: hope. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, woven into the everyday movements of people who had grown to care for each other. Lucy, though still in treatment, started arriving earlier again. Her color returned gradually, her voice grew steadier, and on good days she laughed, sometimes at something Jacob said, other times at something Emily did, and occasionally just because the moment allowed it. Jacob had shifted too, not just in presence but in posture. His eyes, once dulled by grief and exhaustion, had regained clarity. He began shaving again, dressing a little sharper, though not out of vanity. He said it made him feel like he was rejoining the living. He still carried his losses with him, but they didn't weigh him down the way they used to. Instead, they reminded him of what mattered and what he never wanted to take for granted again. Emily noticed. She didn't say it outright, but children have a way of sensing change before adults admit it to themselves. One morning, as she filled the cookie jar with care, she leaned in close to Lucy and whispered, "He smiles more now." Lucy looked across the cafe to where Jacob was crouched beside a table, fixing a loose chair leg, and nodded. "Yes," she replied softly, "he's finding his way back." Jacob didn't know how to explain what was happening to him. He only knew that this little cafe had become more than a safe space, it had become essential. He found himself lingering longer, asking deeper questions and feeling anchored not by obligation but by choice. On one particular afternoon, he stood behind the counter, drying dishes with Lucy while Emily colored in a corner. They talked about the fundraiser, how it had exceeded every expectation, how people still came in asking about Lucy's health and buying cookies. They didn't need just to be part of something good. "What you built here," he said to her, glancing around, "it's not just a cafe. It's a shelter for everyone, including me." Lucy wiped her hands on a towel and looked at him thoughtfully. "You helped turn it into that," she said. "It was struggling before you came. I was struggling. And you just kept showing up." He looked down at the plate in his hands. "I think I needed this place more than I realized." They fell into a comfortable silence until Emily ran over and tugged on Jacob's sleeve. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling him toward the table where she had been drawing. She held up a picture of 3 stick figures under a bright yellow sun. One had a red apron, one had a coffee cup, and the last one had blue eyes and a beard. They were holding hands. "That's us," she said proudly. "You, me, and Mama." Jacob knelt to her level, blinking against the sudden swell in his chest. "I love it," he said, his voice catching. "You belong here," she told him, like it was the simplest truth in the world. Later that night, after the cafe had closed and Emily was asleep upstairs, Jacob helped Lucy take out the trash and clean the kitchen. They moved slowly, both a little tired, both a little quiet. As they stood by the back door, she turned to him and said, "You know, she doesn't say things like that lightly. She's careful with people." "I know," he replied. "That's why it means everything." Lucy hesitated, then said softly, "You've become part of our story, Jacob, whether you meant to or not." "I want to be," he said without pause. "Not just for now, for however long you'll let me." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't need to. She reached out and took his hand, not a gesture of romance, but of shared resilience. Two people who had come from brokenness, learning to build something steady, something sacred together. And in that touch, in that stillness, they both understood this wasn't just a season of healing. It was the beginning of something whole. Summer arrived with golden light pouring through the cafe windows earlier each morning and lingering later each evening, stretching the days in a way that made everything feel just a little more alive. The warmth wasn't just in the sun or the air, but in the laughter that had grown fuller, the small routines that had taken root, and the sense of ease that now flowed between Jacob, Lucy, and Emily like an unspoken language. The cafe had become something close to sacred, not perfect, not always easy, but unquestionably home. On a quiet Thursday morning, Lucy approached Jacob with an idea. Her treatment had officially ended 2 weeks earlier, and though her energy still fluctuated, her spirit had clearly shifted. She stood straighter, smiled more easily, and often caught herself humming without realizing it. That morning, she came out of the back office holding a stack of flyers and placed one gently in front of Jacob where he sat with his coffee. "I want to throw a celebration," she said. 10 years since the cafe opened, and a fresh start. Jacob looked at the flyer. It was hand-drawn, imperfect, and beautiful. It said, "Watson's Cafe 10-year anniversary. Music, cookies, community, hope." There was a little cartoon cookie in the corner with a heart drawn on it. "I love it," Jacob said, without hesitation. "What do you need?" Over the next week, the three of them, Lucy, Jacob, and Emily, threw themselves into planning. Jacob contacted friends and vendors, organizing live music, food trucks, and a pop-up cookie stand run entirely by Emily and her hand-picked helpers, her cousins, and two regulars' children. Lucy worked on the menu and decorations, leaning on her staff, who had all become invested not just in the cafe's success, but in its story. And Emily made handmade invitations, glitter and crayon included, which she personally handed out to every customer with the words, "You have to come. It's going to be the best day ever." When the day finally arrived, the cafe looked like something from a storybook. Strings of paper lanterns lined the outdoor seating area. There were banners with phrases like "Thank you," and "We made it," and cookies for smiles. The cookie booth had sold out within the first 2 hours, and Emily had taken it upon herself to personally greet every guest. She wore a little sash that said "Cookie Captain" and carried a clipboard like a true professional. Jacob moved through the crowd with quiet pride. He didn't give speeches often, but when Lucy gently nudged him toward the makeshift microphone, he didn't hesitate. He stood beneath a strand of twinkling lights, the afternoon sun beginning to dip behind him, and looked out at a crowd that included strangers who'd become regulars, neighbors who'd become friends, and a little girl who had given him his first reason to care again. "I came into this cafe on a bad day," he began. "I didn't expect anything. I didn't even expect to be noticed. But someone did. She handed me a cookie and told me to smile. And that one small act changed everything. This place isn't just about food or coffee. It's about people. About second chances. About finding light even when you don't think you can. I didn't know I needed this cafe, but I did. And I think some of you did too." There was quiet applause, and when Jacob stepped back, Emily ran up and wrapped her arms around his legs. "You did great," she said. Lucy joined them moments later, taking Jacob's hand in hers, not to make a point, just because it felt natural now, as if it had always been that way. That night, when the celebration wound down and the guests trickled out, Jacob stayed behind with Lucy and Emily to clean up. The three of them moved slowly, not rushing the moment. They folded tablecloths, picked up stray napkins, and stacked chairs. When everything was put away, they sat together on the cafe steps, looking out at the empty lot that had only hours earlier been filled with music and joy. Emily leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder and yawned. "It really was the best day ever," she said sleepily. Jacob smiled, resting his hand gently over hers. "Yeah," he whispered, "it really was." And in that peaceful, quiet moment beneath the stars and string lights, with nothing left to prove and nowhere else they'd rather be, it was clear that this wasn't the end of something. It was only the beginning. Autumn settled over the city slowly, exchanging the bright colors of summer for the quiet warmth of golden leaves and cool mornings. The cafe changed with it, its windows now decorated with hand-cut paper pumpkins and strings of soft orange lights. Inside, things felt steady in a way they hadn't in a long time. The chaos had softened. Lucy's treatment was behind her. Emily had started school, walking in every afternoon with drawings and stories, her backpack always bouncing behind her. Jacob, two had changed. The man who once wandered into the cafe with grief carved into every corner of his face now arrived each morning with purpose. He was no longer just a visitor or a helper. He was part of their rhythm, woven into their routines like he had always belonged there. He had kept his promise to be there every day. But one crisp Saturday morning, he arrived holding a sealed envelope and a quiet kind of nervousness. Lucy was behind the counter when he walked in, and she raised an eyebrow at the sight of him gripping the envelope like it weighed more than it should. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he helped her unload a box of supplies, tied on an apron, and joined her in the back office where it was quiet. "I've been thinking about something," he said, sitting across from her, "for a while now." Lucy folded her arms and tilted her head. "That sounds serious." "It is," he said, offering a faint smile before placing the envelope between them. "That's the paperwork for a guardianship application. I know we haven't talked about this like we should have, but I want to be part of Emily's life long term, not just as the guy who fixes tables and pays invoices. I want to be there for her as someone she can count on for anything, always." Lucy stared at the envelope for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she let out a breath and placed her hand over his. "You already are," she said. "You've been that person since the moment you let her hand you a cookie and didn't walk away." Jacob looked down. "I didn't want to overstep." "You didn't," she replied. "I've thought about it too. She already sees you as family. I think you knew that." They filed the paperwork a week later. It wasn't adoption, not yet. It was legal guardianship, a formal promise that he was committed to Emily's well-being and future. The day the forms were approved, Emily ran into the cafe with a certificate in her hand and declared to every customer that Jacob was officially hers. He laughed, lifted her into his arms, and whispered, "And you're officially mine." With legalities handled and Lucy regaining her strength, they all began to dream bigger. Jacob used his connections to help Lucy apply for a small business development grant, not just for new equipment or supplies, but for expansion, a second location. Lucy hesitated at first. She never saw herself as someone who could manage more than one cafe, but Jacob reminded her that she had built something that deserved to grow. After all, the original wasn't just a coffee shop. It was a sanctuary. Together, they began mapping out a plan. Emily was part of every step, sitting beside them at the kitchen table with her crayons and cookie samples, offering opinions with the seriousness of a CEO. When asked what the second location should be called, she thought for a moment and said, "The cookie place that saved people." They shortened it for the sign, but everyone who stepped through its door later said they could feel what she meant. By late November, the second cafe was under construction. It was located only a few blocks from the first, in a slightly larger space with more room for families, a children's reading corner, and a tiny kitchen just for baking cookies. Emily insisted on teaching other kids how to make smile cookies just like she had. Jacob helped install shelving and pick out furniture, and Lucy oversaw everything with a calm confidence she hadn't possessed a year ago. They held a soft opening the week before Thanksgiving. It wasn't flashy, just coffee, cookies, and the same quiet warmth that had made the original special. Friends, neighbors, and first-time visitors filled the space quickly. Jacob stood behind the counter next to Lucy and Emily, watching as people laughed and shared stories. He caught himself smiling more than he ever had in the past. He didn't feel like a guest anymore. He felt like he was home. That night, after they locked the doors and turned off the lights, the three of them sat on the floor of the new cafe, surrounded by the quiet echo of something just beginning. Emily curled up between them, her head resting on Jacob's shoulder, her fingers still sticky from frosting. Lucy leaned back against the wall and looked around. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked quietly. Jacob nodded. "All the time." And do you regret anything? He thought for a moment, then looked at her. Only that I didn't walk into your cafe sooner. She smiled at that, a tired, grateful smile that carried everything they'd been through and everything still to come. Emily stirred in her sleep and mumbled something neither of them could quite catch. They looked down at her, then at each other. She's going to be okay, Lucy whispered. So are we, Jacob said. And they were. In the soft silence of that empty cafe, with the lights dimmed and the future waiting just beyond the front doors, they sat together not as survivors of pain, but as a family made from it, not bound by blood, but by choice, by love, and by the small, powerful miracle of one little girl who once offered a cookie to a stranger with sad eyes and unknowingly changed all of their lives forever.